So I was raised by Christian parents, and I was youth leader in my church when I was in high school. Went to Auburn, got involved in Campus Crusade for Christ, now Cru. Was very active in beach evangelism and so forth, spoke in churches, and joined the staff of Campus Crusade for Christ full-time and worked with them for 17 and a half years. Their headquarters. Then I left there having finished a master's in Bible and being ordained as a minister. Went to Texas A&M where I lost my faith completely. And I say completely meaning I didn't even believe there was a God. Now, I really didn't think that was possible. I didn't think it was possible for a Christian to fall that far, and I didn't know that it was possible for a Christian to come back. Both are true. So what happened was, while I was in the full-time ministry, something happened to my job, and it just no longer existed. I committed myself to full-time Christian work, so when that happened, it's like I was willing, but there was no job. So it was almost like a divorce that I didn't ask for. I was committed, my spouse, the ministry, was not. So that kind of rocked my faith a little bit. I actually stayed in full-time Christian work for several more years as a management trainer. That's when I found out how much I loved to teach. So I decided God must want me to be a university professor. I packed up everything we owned, sold our house, moved my wife and 3 kids to College Station, Texas. A couple of years into the PhD program, I was asked to leave. Well, I didn't have a concept of that. I had told God I wanted to do and be what He wanted me to be. I had assumed that if I wasn't supposed to be in full-time Christian work, that I'd pray about it and then the next thing I'd do would work. It didn't. So I had a couple of choices. I could pack up my family, sell a house, and try to find another university to start all over again, or I could change majors. So I was in the business school. I went to the sociology department. Sociology is not the most Christian-friendly department. There have been strong Christian sociologists, but not as a whole. The very first day, the professor stood up and says, "There's no such damn thing as God." Well, I was kind of shocked. Thought that didn't sound like a very scientific statement. It wasn't, but that was his conclusion, and it was very matter of fact for him. He was a nice guy. Had us over at his home a couple of times for burgers and stuff. And in that department, I had assignments where I read atheist material, explanations for how things evolved, how wolves made sounds, and eventually that became people talking to each other. They didn't have any fact in there necessarily, but it was just assumed. And after a couple 100 pages of reading this so that I could feed it back, it made more sense. I went to some Christians I knew and said, I'm beginning to have doubts in my faith. And they didn't know what to say. So I backed off from looking for help from them. I remember walking one night all by myself, looked up at the stars and decided I'm all alone. There's nobody there. So I just remember very distinctly that moment that I did not believe in God anymore. In this state, I was miserable. I wanted to keep this tragedy from my family. I didn't want my kids to no longer believe in Santa Claus, as I now pictured God. I never considered any other religion. God had to be perfect, and I knew I wasn't. There was no way I was going to earn my way to be worthy of God, and there's no way I was going to earn my way to become God. Either Jesus Christ died for my sins, or there is no God. So I continued to go to church, but it wasn't. The world was black and white. There wasn't any color. I was pretty miserable. If you've had purpose in life and then you no longer have purpose in life, that's miserable. what helped me first off in my return was thinking about how much I loved my wife. Now, we were having our struggles. She was fighting stuff too. She thought I was going to divorce her, and I thought she was going to divorce me. Neither one of those was going to happen, but we didn't know it. But I knew I loved her. And I thought, just like Descartes said, I think, therefore I am, I began to think about it and decided I love, therefore there is something besides the material, and there's something besides me. And I thought, why would any creature evolve to be miserable? That didn't make sense. As C.S. Lewis said, if life has no meaning, we should never have found out. So my faith began to grow slowly. It was actually a couple of years before it was solid again. But I grew in my faith little by little. And then when I got to my dissertation, there was a point when I'm doing my oral part. I was explaining a part of my dissertation about small group dynamics, and somebody asked me about a particular theory that was a sociological version of the theory of evolution. And I said, yeah, it makes sense to me. They asked me if I believed it, and I said, yeah, it makes sense to me. As a matter of fact, I think it fits better in this theory in sociology than it does in biology. And that caused a tremor. It's like my dissertation stopped. The committee was no longer willing to consider me for a PhD until I relented on that statement. I didn't say I did not believe in evolution. I just said, scientifically looking at it, it made more sense in sociology where there was a mind to think up ideas to create the alternatives that were then eliminated by the market. But I went to one of my professors who wanted to work through this with me, and we talked, and I figured out that they really didn't have anything that I didn't know. They didn't have some information that I didn't have. They just simply believed it, and that it was enough explanation that there was no God. They don't have answers either. I told my professor, thanks for explaining it to me, and they allowed me to finish my PhD. But I hadn't changed my mind. It had in fact solidified in me that I knew something they didn't know. With that, I took another kick up in my faith. Well, I was on my job in Montgomery, Alabama, teaching as a university professor. Very weak in my faith, but I would pray. And I remember being on my knees many times and praying and telling God I wanted to be the father my children needed, the husband my wife needed. I wanted them to grow in their relationship with Christ and to know salvation, even though I was going to hell. I was convinced that God could save prostitutes, and he could save drug pushers, and he could save murderers. But I had been full-time ministry, and I had left him cold. He couldn't forgive that. One night I was on a walk with my wife, and on that walk she asked some kind of a question, and I have no recollection what the question was, but I remember what my answer was. And my answer was, you wouldn't want God unless God wanted you. And she took that and probably forgot it. But after I heard myself say it, it wouldn't go away. And I thought, where did I get that? I had a master's in Bible, but I didn't remember specifically where I picked that up. So I went home and looked it up. I found John 6:44. And Jesus was speaking. And he said, no one comes to me unless the Father who sent me draws him. And I got this picture of God the Father and God the Son going shopping together. God put his arm around me and walked me over to Jesus and said, I want this one. And Jesus says, I'll pay for it. And I realized that I personally would not desire God unless he was calling me and wanted me. I was saved.